and their heirs carved out vibrant Hellenistic kingdoms, and for generations fought a continual battle for dominance. The land of Egypt would fall to Alexander's general Ptolemy, who had been left to oversee the wealthy territory on the Nile. Ptolemy would shape a kingdom that combined Greek and Egyptian culture into a dynasty that would last for almost 300 years.
Ptolemy I was a man who had made a career as a military commander and advisor under Alexander. What he therefore wanted was as rich and secure a portion of that empire as he could get.
Egypt was the crown jewel of the Mediterranean. Its surplus of grain meant that a windfall awaited Ptolemy as ruler of the breadbasket of the ancient world. Ptolemy's plan was to ensure his legitimacy both as Egypt's king and also true heir to Alexander. Macedonian tradition held that the one who buried the body of the king secured his rights to the throne. So Ptolemy hijacked the funeral procession of Alexander and brought the mummified body to Egypt, where it would eventually rest in Alexandria, the same city Alexander himself had founded 15 years earlier. Under Ptolemy, Egypt would grow to be a powerful kingdom, and Alexandria would transform itself into the intellectual and scientific capital of the Greek world.
He wanted it to be a city that joined with Greek culture and used both Greek and Egyptian technological know-how to build a new Athens, if you will.
Alexandria lies on Egypt's coastline, and an easily accessible harbor would be vital for sustaining trade with other cities around the Mediterranean. To that end, Ptolemy ordered one of the most ambitious engineering projects ever seen, the world's first known lighthouse.
During the night, it's shown to a great distance, and ships can actually see it from many, many miles away. And during the day, there was smoke coming out of it, so it was still very visible. It must have been a formidable thing to behold.
At the time, only the Great Pyramid at Giza was taller than the lighthouse. Legend says it stood 300 feet tall, comparable in size to the Statue of Liberty. Some estimates claim the lighthouse may have stood as tall as 450 feet. How the lighthouse was built remains a mystery, but 25 miles from Alexandria, a funeral monument stands that researchers believe is a scaled-down replica of the actual lighthouse. Based on that model, it appears the lighthouse was constructed with 3 separate and distinct levels.
The lower level was square, the one above was octagonal, and the final one was cylindrical. And on top, there was the beacon.
From the top of the lighthouse, a strong and steady beam of light emanated out into the sea. Scholars believe wood was most likely the lighthouse's fuel, and that the lower section housed a spiral ramp large enough for pack animals to climb, pulling carts laden with firewood. The ramps may have led to a series of storage rooms where the firewood was kept. From the second level upwards, a shaft with a dumbwaiter was probably used to lift fuel up to the top.
There are stories about mirrors and devices that could amplify the light of this fire so that it could be seen from miles and miles away. But there's no real evidence of such a thing, and there are quite a few scholars who believe that it was just a normal beacon, it was just a big fire and nothing more.
The lighthouse stood for almost 1,600 years, battered by storms, tidal waves, and even earthquakes. Then around 1300 AD, massive quakes brought that ancient wonder of the world crashing down for good. For nearly 700 years, the lighthouse lay buried underneath the waters of the Mediterranean. Then, in 1994, a team of divers and archaeologists uncovered massive stones in Alexandria's harbor, revealing what may be the foundations of a guiding light in engineering history.
Jean-Yves Empereur, the well-known French archaeologist, started a very, very important series of underwater research. He is finding architectural members of the pharaohs, so there might come a day when it may even be restored.
Beneath the waves, archaeologists documented pieces of stone that weighed more than 70 tons, including one piece that was believed to be the lintel of the lighthouse's massive doorway. But the lighthouse would not be Ptolemy's only engineering marvel in Alexandria. As the lighthouse rose above the skyline, he launched another building project, one that brought the greatest minds in the world to his cosmopolitan city. It was called the Great Library of Alexandria, a place that claimed to have over 200,000 scrolls dedicated to knowledge and learning. It was here that one engineer would harness the power of steam 1,700 years before the world ever imagined a locomotive. It was in Alexandria during the reign of Ptolemy II that the Hebrew Bible was first translated into Greek. After the death of Alexander and breakup of his empire, one of his generals who had formerly lived his life conquering civilizations now wanted to create one. Ptolemy's infusion of Greek culture into Egypt's wealth and prestige would lay the foundations for a new kind of city, one that would become the greatest and most cosmopolitan in the ancient world, Alexandria.
It's the city of the world. And as such, the kings, the Ptolemean kings of the new kingdom of Egypt, created something that is completely new in the known world.
It would be the towering fires of Alexandria's lighthouse that guided ships into the harbor. But it was another vision of Ptolemy's that became a beacon for the greatest minds in the world, Alexandria's museum and library.
But that does not mean it was for exhibiting something. A museum at that time meant something like a research center.
It's a think tank, perhaps the world's first great think tank. And Ptolemy buys great scholars and writers from around the Greek world. And the library is the greatest repository of books in the Greek world.
It had a mythical amount of scrolls, something, some say 200,000, some say 700,000.
It was at the museum and library where, for the first time in human history, knowledge becomes a commodity to be stored and shared. In fact, some scientific discoveries made in Alexandria over 200 years before Christ wouldn't be accepted until 1,800 years later. Pupils were taught the Earth was round, and one of the great astronomers, Eratosthenes, calculated the circumference of the Earth and was off by less than 1%.
So it's perhaps a very interesting story that the Ptolemean kings, whenever a ship will come into Alexandria, the first thing that the captain had to do is had to declare if he had any papyri, any works of philosophers or science on board. They were taken to the library to be copied, but usually they gave the captain back a copy and not the original.
Although Ptolemy was a Macedonian Greek, the key to the success of his dynasty in Egypt would be in its willingness to assimilate Egyptian culture. Ptolemy's own family went to great lengths to adopt Egyptian practices as their own. Ptolemy's son, Ptolemy II, even married his own sister, Arsinoe.
There had been a tradition in the Egyptian pharaonic families of brother-sister marriage and there was a sense that a figure like that couldn't just marry any old ordinary mortal, and that eventually only a sister who sort of shared his divine origins was an appropriate companion and spouse.
The Ptolemies may have used Egyptian traditions to elevate themselves to the status of gods, but in the end, like all pharaohs before them, these kings were still mortal. Ptolemy wouldn't live to see all of his dreams of Alexandria fully realized. He died in 283 BC of natural causes, before the library and even the lighthouse were finally completed. Alexandria continued to flourish as a mecca for knowledge under its Ptolemaic rulers and produced many of the age's foremost thinkers. And it would be just after the end of their nearly 300-year reign in the 1st century AD that Alexandria would produce one of the most famous Greek engineers in history. His name was Hero, and his famous designs place him among the ancient world's greatest mechanical engineers.
All his books are extremely detailed, very well describing all engineering procedures. But Hero himself also was good in the sense that he has an inclination in favor of arts. We must remember that in ancient Greek, the word art was meaning also technology.
Hero's engineering designs had many practical uses, including ideas for fire extinguishers, odometers, and even automatic doors. But it was Hero's experiments with steam technology that would ignite his imagination. The first working steam engine was built in England around 1700 AD. Over 1600 years earlier, Hero built the forerunner of the steam engine, called an eolipile.
It was a metal sphere put up in such a way so that it could rotate freely, and had two tubes applied. When filled with water and heated from below, steam developed and started to turn to put the sphere into motion, thereby turning air into something very useful, something that you could control.
We maintain that under other historical circumstances, this industrial revolution could possibly have taken place in Alexandria after a couple of centuries. The essence was there.
The interesting thing about the steam engine of Hero is that the guy discovered steam power. Okay, so the question beckons, how comes they didn't use steam power? How comes they didn't make steam engines like the English did a few centuries later? And the answer to that is that in Egypt, forced labor or slave labor was so cheap. You didn't need machines to do the job. So that's like an interesting idea. You can have a technology and you don't know what to do with it because there's not a real economical need for it.
Hero's inventions still intrigue engineers to this day, but there might have been many more innovations from Alexandria we may never know. Scholars don't agree on when it happened, but much of the ancient world's scientific knowledge vanished into smoke and ashes when the ancient library burned to the ground. Still, Alexandria and Greek engineering were flames of innovation that lit the ancient world like a star that guides a ship across the sea. The miraculous age of Alexander may have seen empires rise and fall, but what's left in its wake is a legacy still felt in our own world today.
To outsmart the raw forces of nature and to turn them into something beneficial. That's the common denominator for all Greek engineering